Okay, I believe it is 1 o'clock Pacific, and we are ready to get started. This is the Digital Collection Essentials webinar, and this particular one that we're going to focus on today is the essentials for a discoverable digital collection. So I want to take a moment just to introduce myself, just in case you've not come to one of my webinars before or if we've not worked together. My name is Rachel Christine Woody. I own a consulting firm and I serve libraries, archives, and museums and any sort of cultural heritage organization that has an archive or museum function. I do have a specialty in digital collections management, and specifically, I am very into digitization technology, especially cutting edge digital project management as a result of all of the digital projects I've been working on, and also digital usership. So, who uses our collections, why they use them, and how to make them better. And as a result, I've launched multiple digital projects that include cutting edge technology, collaborative portals, and the migration of collections information from one system into another. I do want to say thank you to Northwest Archivists. The Continuing Education Fund is what helped sponsor today and Thursday's webinars. And for Northwest Archivist members, this is a free webinar series for you. And we have opened it up since we had room, since it's virtual. We did open it up to our colleagues across the country and ask them for a donation. And so if you are one of those colleagues and you have the capacity to give a $5 donation, there is the link down below, northwestarchivist.org/donations. And my personal request would be if you can make a donation, please select the Archivist in Residence Scholarship Fund, which goes towards paying for a paid internship. 50 Northwest Archivist is the 501c3, so these donations are tax deductible. And thank you to those who have donated. I also want to take a moment and thank Alicia Bapstein. Alicia is a dear friend and colleague and works at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. And as part of the application to get some continuing education funds to put this webinar together, an organization and colleague had to write a letter of support. So thank you so much, Alicia, for bringing this idea to me and for helping us make it a reality. So, some housekeeping items before we get started. This is a live session, which is different from most of my other webinars, and we are recording it, and so it'll be available on YouTube with auto captioning at that point. In 24 hours, an email will go out and it'll contain the link for this webinar as well as all of the links that I share throughout this presentation. So if you miss a link, don't worry about it. It will be sent to you tomorrow in your email. Please keep yourselves muted and off camera. I have this in webinar mode, so that shouldn't be a problem, but just in case, know that, typical Zoom politeness etiquette there. And we are going to use the Q&A box, which I think is on this side because it's mirrored, to track questions. I am not going to answer any questions until the end of this webinar, but if you use the Q&A function for this platform, we can go through them together at the end. And yes, that is the end of that slide. Okay, getting into the content, here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about our current reality, just a little summary there. We're going to talk about what the sort of agreed upon truth is, or at least from a digital usership perspective. We're then going to get into the good stuff. We're going to talk about what makes a discoverable digital collection and get into what are the essentials for that, what are the 6 tools we can use for any CMS that you may have. And when I say CMS, that means collections management system, or some people content management system. And we'll also talk about ways to deliver those collections online without a CMS, because for some of us, we don't have one, or maybe our CMS doesn't quite work the way we would like it to. And then we are going to get into some discussion. Since this is all about discovery and engagement, we are going to talk about what an engaging point of access is. strategies for how to deliver a meaningful online experience with your collections, and then I have tons of good examples I want to show you to help give you some inspiration. And then we'll conclude and have time for questions. So, our current reality, I don't want to dwell on this too much because I feel like we've all got some major like COVID trauma 2020 fatigue. But to start us out, our digital collections, there's the user expectation that they are online, and COVID-19 has only reinforced this expectation. And now all of our audiences, for many of us, they're entirely remote. So having those things online, there was already pressure we were feeling. And then with the pandemic happening and us having extremely limited access to serve our audience with our collections, it's now basically you need it online or you can't function. Also, many digital collections aren't easily discoverable and lack engagement tools. So just because you might have it online, you might not be getting the traffic that you want to see, which is part of what we're kind of going to cover today in this webinar. Then those without a digital collection solution, so without like a collections management system or a not great one, you now undeniably need one, or at least need something to help fill that role of a collections management system. And another part of this reality is that all of these digital collection tools can be really expensive, especially if you don't have anything in place yet. And so not only do the technology tools cost money, but there's also the personnel, time, and cost factor as well. So these are all realities that we are dealing with. And then for the undeniable truth here, if your collections are online, or if they're online but they're not immediately findable and in front of people, then they don't exist. So from a digital user perspective, no matter if we're doing a really super awesome job getting everything cataloged and in the CMS, if nobody knows that they're online, or if for some reason they're in the CMS but not online, that at this point and for this year, they don't exist. They're not able to be used in this sort of format and situation. So what is a discoverable digital collection? And I'm using digital collection here for a collection that is digitized and put online. It can include born digital products or collection items, but what we're really focusing on here is the physical items that have existed, or perhaps born digital items. They are now in a system digitized and available as an online collection. So I just want to be very specific and clarify that point. So a discoverable digital collection is one that can be found easily via organic channels by the general public. The premise is that users aren't already familiar with the organization nor your collection contents, and yet they're able to find their way to your online collections organically. And this can be via an internet search, scrolling through social media, and any other methods that aren't directly being pulled from your organization's website. Once there, the users linger and are encouraged to stay and further explore the collections. So not only do you have to be online and be discoverable, you also need to be engaging. So what is essential for a discoverable digital collection? I have four main points here. The first one is that you need some sort of public-facing portal, and this is to help provide a point of access to the collection and also something to help encourage the browsing of the collection and engaging with the collection. Another thing that you'll need is an online presence beyond your collections management system, and this can be in the form of your organization's website, YouTube channel, social media channels, etc. Anything that can help boost your search engine optimization and help point potential audience members to your collections online. Another thing is to easily share options from the collections management system to all available social media channels. And they should be easy enough and obvious enough that people are encouraged to do so versus discouraged. So those sharing buttons need to be easily found. They need to be for every item, on every obvious page, just to have people actually be encouraged and do it. And then, of course, we need some good SEO, and SEO is short for search engine optimization, which is a very large topic for another day. But these three previous points all help you towards having a good search engine optimization score for your collection items. And the better that score is, the better your results for your collection items will appear in relevant searches that the general public is doing. So, when we're thinking about collections, and particularly online collections that are being delivered and explored within the collections management system, there are 6 tools to use. Now, depending on what collection management system you have, you may or may not have access to tools that perform these functions, which is a reality that we have, right? Going back to the reality check. But these are things that if you have them, definitely I encourage you to use and explore them. And if you have a CMS that doesn't offer these for some reason, it's definitely time to think about how you might be able to get a different CMS that's a bit more robust. But that's more on what Thursday's webinar is about. So for the 6 tools, the first one is utilize the mobile and accessible sites. So depending on what kind of collections management system you have, it can be mobile friendly, it can be mobile responsive, or it can be a separate mobile site altogether. And for many collections management systems, especially the more intricate and robust ones, they are starting to move towards, instead of just mobile friendly, they're providing a completely separate mobile site that has a little bit more streamlined navigation, that is able to perform more readily on a smartphone, having correctly sized things versus resized on the fly, those types of things. So that's like tool number one, if your CMS can provide that. And especially for accessibility, collections management systems are finally starting to move towards that being the standard, where they're following WCAG guidelines, which you can read more about. I think it's w3.org is the website. And at this point, going back to similar reasoning for the mobile sites, in order to provide a more streamlined and effective way to use a collections management system, they're providing separate accessibility websites. Another tool to use is creating and promoting browsable galleries. For many of us, while we do have those users who know our collections, know what they want to look at, and are very pinpointed, for the majority of our users, they're actually coming from a completely different place. They're coming for enjoyment, engagement, maybe some education, and they're going to be more prone to browsing versus pinpointed searching. So having those browsable galleries would be a great tool to use to engage them. 3, this may seem obvious, but I see so many of us not doing this, and that's we need to have eye-catching visuals. So thinking about banners across the top of the pages, thinking about utilizing higher resolution images, documents, different viewers to have people use to view those items online. Any sort of like increased, more polished, more engaging way to actually explore these items and having them be big, beautiful, and visual is a great way to go about that. Another tool to use is to play with visitor-friendly metadata. For many of us, we're professionally trained. We have best practices that we follow, and there are good reasons for that. So I'm not saying deviate from best practices, but I am saying, or I am encouraging you to be more thoughtful about what it is that we present to the user side and how we present it. And quite honestly, when people look at a very traditionally typed out catalog record, it's not pretty for them. Their eyes glaze over, they're not sure what all the fields are about, and really all that they're typically interested in is a brief description and maybe who made it. So thinking about maybe hiding some of those fields or having it be where it's, you expand it and then they could see the fields if they wanted to, playing with the display of the metadata and what you put in there. The next one is to connect it with related items. So many of our users expect a online retail experience. So thinking about Amazon and all of the other platforms now based off of Amazon in terms of, oh, you liked this item, we have like 6 more items we'd like to show you. Similarly, so much of our collections are interconnected, and really finding a way to help point people to related items not only is going to help the digital users learn more about your collection, but it's going to encourage them to engage more. And then 6, offer a quick guide. And this is not necessarily a tool provided by the CMS, but it is something you can do with your CMS, where you can do like a 90-second tutorial on how to use your collections management system, for example, and show that video or type up a quick little infographic to be on the front page of the CMS. So these are all things that, with our more general users in mind, or those that are new to our collection, these are all tools that we can use in tandem with our CMS or within our CMS to help encourage that collection exploration. So I do want to show you some examples. This particular one is colorado.edu. And this collection, this is where they actually put out, they've got a view the collection for people who need different accessibility measures. And they've got the view an accessible version of this collection, like direct link. So this is how I've typically seen this offered, is once you make it to the collection landing page, if you're looking for a different mobile site, or if you're looking for an accessibility version, they're usually putting the buttons right on that front page. This next example is a great show of browsable galleries, and I think for this particular one, which is Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art, um, they have, I think it is just these 6. So obviously they've got thousands of items, and so they have distilled it down to 6 browsable galleries of what people will typically be interested in. For this one, they've chosen to go topically with their art, and for others, depending on what sort of organization you are, what type of collections you have, obviously make that determination for what makes sense to you in terms of how you would break those out. But I do want to point out that we tend to put things in collections based on either creator or collector, whereas that's not as meaningful to the user. And for users, it's more about the topics that are represented, the time period that's represented, the format of the materials. So I want to encourage you to get creative here in terms of how you could create these artificial galleries and present them, and having in mind the general user who wants to do that browsing. Here is another example. This is visitor-friendly metadata, and honestly, we could see it a lot more friendly than this as well, but I think it is a good start because for the Heckscher collection, the landing page, when you're doing the collection search, it prioritizes the thumbnail display with just the artist and like very limited information. So we've got title, date, what sort of format it's in, and this looks like an accession number, which probably doesn't need to be there, but maybe they can't take that out. And then once you click on that, you get more of the fuller record. I don't think we necessarily need to show all of this information to the user, but I do appreciate how they're prioritizing the visuals here for the results. They're giving bare minimum information that the user might want. And then when they click on it, they're able to see very clearly, I'm looking at title, date, medium, and here is a nice description if I want to read it. Here's an example of connecting related items, and this one is actually the Oregon Art Collection, owned, I think it's by the Oregon Commission. And I loved how for some of their galleries, they were able to not only show like, for this particular collection, I think this is oral histories. And so they have a picture of the person that was interviewed. They have a picture of the actual exhibit that used these interviews. And then they have the interview here within the record. So you're seeing these connected items, you're seeing how they were displayed physically, and you can actually listen to this interview while you're looking at the rest of the metadata and the items in that particular record. So just a very nice way to show some mixed media and some connected related items. This is another great example that I really liked. This particular one, I'm going to say it wrong, at Musée Heritage. I believe they're in Canada. Yes, Western Canada here. And this particular collection is on horse racing, and they have This is like a collection landing page, so it's pulling information and items from the collections management system and creating collection landing pages to introduce users to the collection. So you have information on what the collection is, who created it, and you've got photographs dispersed throughout, you've got documents, and this particular one, I think it's an actual recording of the horse race when I listened to it, which was so cool. So anyway, this is a great, obviously I'm super excited about this one, a great use of collections management information and materials pulled into a more visitor-friendly, engaging way and showing some obvious connections of related material. Okay, so some of us, we don't have a collections management system, or we have a CMS, but it's not super great, or we don't really have a lot of staff that can work with the CMS to do what we need it to do. Like there could be many things at play here. So if you don't have that option available to you, I did want to cover some great ways I'm seeing people use platforms that exist out there for free or low cost that aren't traditional collections management systems. So I am going to have us go through and look at examples where we're using those different types of platforms to sort of substitute for not having a collections management system. So we're going to start with the visual. We're going to look at Flickr, permanent.org, and Pinterest, which are mostly free to low cost, depending on how much you're using it. And then we're going to take a look at YouTube. There's an Vimeo is very similar, and thinking about audio-visual materials specifically. And then we're going to take a look at WordPress or similar, which are free to low cost websites slash blogs that we have seen people use to help present their collections. So our first example comes to us from Oregon State University, and because this is a Northwest Archivist specific webinar, at least sponsored by them, I did want to highlight where I could the colleagues in this area. And so this particular collection is from Oregon State University. It is in Flickr. You can see it at flickr.com/photos or /OSU Commons. And then I also wanted to point out that our colleague Tia Edmondson Morton also wrote up an article on OSU's use of Flickr as a collections delivery mechanism. So I encourage you to check out that link also to see what she had to say about the experience. But as you can see, we've got in the albums tab here for Flickr, we have broken out different collections. Now, these could be artificial collections, these could be actual literal collections. That part I'm not sure. But it's a great way, no matter which one they did, you can make your own decision and actually show collections in this particular way, in this gallery format. And while we're using albums instead of collections, you can see how the mechanisms of cataloging, publishing online, and gathering are the same. This particular one is permanent.org, and this is actually my own personal family archives, a project that I worked on over the holidays. And permanent.org is a little newer to the scene. They started out being focused on more of the family papers, family research, genealogy, but they are starting to get into working with local historical societies and other archives and museums to see how their platform can be further expanded to include our best practices. So I wanted to mention them because they are a free to low cost, depending on how much storage you want, way for you to catalog your items, publish them. There's controls here as to whether you want it to be like internal link only or open to the public. There's ways to play around. You can do all sorts of file types with permanent.org, so it's not just limited to visual like this particular gallery. And it's a fun one to play with, and I look forward to seeing where they go. Another thing that I know you as professionals will be interested to know is permanent.org is one of the best platforms I have seen in terms of digital preservation mechanisms in place. If you were to use, I think it was IMLS who came up with the Power tool, POWRR, that whole grid with like, it was a lot, it was like 30 different checkboxes to see if you were following digital preservation methods. looking at that checkbox and going through it with permanent.org, they meet almost all of those check marks. So if you're super into digital preservation, I encourage you to look into this platform. And this particular sample is from Pinterest, and this is the Seattle Municipal Archives. And you can see here whether these are artificial collections or actual collections. They have what Pinterest is calling pins, where you can essentially gather these into collections or albums and have these visuals be represented with some of the item information involved. So sort of similar to Flickr, a little bit different audience, a little bit different in terms of mechanisms. So if you're new to all of this, I encourage you to play with all of them and see what speaks to you. This one is a YouTube, so audio visual example. YouTube, if you don't already know, they can do audio or video. And this example is from Montana Historical Society, which is just really, they have so much content on here. It's really impressive. And if anybody knows who is responsible for this, please let me know. I would love to chat with that person. They have 2.25K subscribers. It's a lot of subscribers for, Archives Historical Society. And they have so many videos. And you can see here, we've got obviously some historical footage. We've got some like behind the scenes footage. And this looks like some old, KRTV historical film footage. So I encourage you to take a look here. This is the original content, and they've also gone and they've utilized the playlist mechanism that YouTube has. And you can create playlists and basically curate it in the way we don't use it professionally. Basically create your own playlists of content. You could put them all in collections, or you could do topics, timelines, etc. Really getting creative with what you think users would be interested in. And what's nice with these playlists is it doesn't have to be entirely your content. You can include other people's videos. So if you know that there's related content that has been put out by a different historical society, or maybe a private local family, for example, you can pull those in as well. So it's fun to play around with and do some collection connections too. This example is Oregon Wine History Archive, and for those of you who know me, you know that I used to work and has helped establish the Oregon Wine History Archive, but I can't take credit for this one. This is entirely of Rich Schmidt's creation. The items that are in the Oregon Wine History Archive, they have been cataloged using Digital Commons B Press, because that was the solution put in place for the institutional repository. And so instead of getting yet one more system in place for archive specific things, at least when I was there, we were just going ahead to catalog into Digital Commons. However, as many of us know, that's not exactly a user-friendly format. And so what Rich has done is he's taken all of the media, the photographs, the oral history interview videos, and has taken the information in the files and plugged it into, I believe this is a WordPress backend. So you can explore the videos, historical photos, present day photos in a much more user-friendly format. And the Google Analytics, the SEO, the search engine optimization score, doing this WordPress site is much better than many CMS, including Digital Commons, because the databases get so bogged down. Again, SEO is a whole other conversation, but having these collections in something that's more SEO friendly, like a WordPress website, not only is more user friendly and engaging, but is better SEO. So this actually comes up first in your Google search before the other stuff. Okay, so what if no one's looking at your collections? Maybe you have stuff online, but in looking at your statistics, it's just not getting the type of traction that you would like it to. So if that's the case for you, my recommendation is that you get out of the collections management system. So it's great to have one and you can utilize the stuff in there, but maybe play with some other platforms. I want you to get creative, and I want you to explore other mediums. So we talked about some earlier. in the second portion about if you don't have a CMS, you could use those. Now we're going to get into what is engaging and how we can build on that. So what is an engaging point of access? I want to give you like my top 10. This is what makes something engaging. Keep in mind, you probably can't or don't want to do all 10 at once, but you should at least have several elements from this top 10 list in any of the endeavors you are doing to make sure that it is an engaging thing that you are creating for your users. So number one, it has to tell a story. We are super into our collections. That's why we do what we do. But we can't make that assumption for our community and our users or our potential users. So we need to help actually tell the story that we know because we're working with the stuff all the time. And when you tell a story, this gets into number two, it has to have a human element. So no matter what type of collection you have, find a way to approach it where it has that human element piece so that people can find some sort of inherent human connection with it, and it helps provide some additional meaning. Three is make sure it's something new. So even if it's not new to you, it is probably new to your audience. And so for a lot of us, when we put stuff up, as soon as it's up and published online, we don't think about it again, which I've definitely been at fault for that too. We have to make sure that we're constantly presenting things to people as new things, because if it's just static, people have seen it before, they're not going to look at it again, and so you're going to lose engagement there. Four is that it has to tie to something current. So when at all possible, when you're thinking of that story or that human angle, how can you tie it to something current? And I think this last year, unfortunately, was a great opportunity for us to practice tying our collections to the unprecedented times of this last year. When it's not a traumatic year, you can do things that are more lighthearted and tie it to, like, women's suffrage celebrating 100 years. Maybe it's a local anniversary to celebrate, that kind of thing. Number five, do something that encourages further exploration. So we'll get into some examples that do a great job of this, but essentially what I want you to keep in mind here is that no matter what you create, always give somebody an option to do more digging. So if you create a blog post, for example, talking about a collection item or maybe something you just scanned in, make sure you're giving people some next steps they could take if they wanted to learn more. So maybe there's more collection items they can go look at. Maybe there's a behind the scenes video that they can go watch, or they can register for a lecture coming up, that kind of thing. So always make sure that they have options to further explore if they want to. Number six, whatever it is that you're providing, no matter what medium, you need to make sure that it's good enough that it stops or slows a scroll. So thinking about Instagram, thinking about YouTube, thinking about Reddit, when you're doing the sort of the mindless scrolling, which many of us have increased this year, make sure that whatever you're presenting is different from what else they're seeing on their feed, is different from what you're usually posting. So again, keeping it new and having it be something that you know is going to actually stop or slow someone down to get their attention. So having it be like an image that is silly, for example, or having something that's very timely and important, and making sure that that is obvious on whatever it is that you're displaying is a great way to help do that. Number seven, make sure that whatever it is that you're doing doesn't require they move or click elsewhere, because you will lose people doing that. So for this particular one, whatever your goal is, make sure you get it done on that one page. So if your goal is to tell the story about an item, if your goal is to let people know about an event coming up they can register for, make sure that they don't have to do any other work, like go read more over here or go watch the video over there. Whatever your main goal is, make sure it's on that primary page. And then if they want to explore more things, then they can click more, but don't ever make that the first action that they have to go and click somewhere else. All right, number 8, make sure it's easy to understand. So we did talk about metadata earlier, and I just want to reiterate, for many of our users, hell, even for our researchers, they would probably appreciate a more common, more general language and having it be something that is easy to understand. So keep that in mind. Language is important, especially when we're dealing with a more general audience, for them to feel included and like they are actually invited to that conversation, essentially. Number 9 is that it has to be quick to consume. So, for example, many of you, there are blog posts and news articles now where when you see the headline, like if it's a hyperlink, you also automatically get like a, this takes 2 minutes to read kind of thing. And that is very helpful to people because for many of us, especially this last year that's so hectic and, a lot of people and things requiring our time and attention, we don't have a lot of time to consume things thoughtfully. So whatever it is that you're trying to present, whatever that goal is, make sure that it's quick for them to be able to consume and get and appreciate. Also, and this is the last one for this list, depending on what it is that you're creating, make sure that you are including captions, closed captioning, alt text, etc., depending on what platform you're in and what sort of items you're working with. If there's a way to help provide extra data for like screen readers or for audio visual impairment, make sure you're providing those too. Not only is that a great way to help include everybody in enjoying your particular items, but it also helps with consumption. For example, if you are watching videos on Facebook, how many people listen to those on mute and just read the captions? It's a lot of us. So it's a great way, even if it's not, needed for accessibility reasons, it's actually wanted for consumption reasons. And then the third reason as to why this is a good thing to do is, again, that search engine optimization. It will help increase your score. It will help make things more findable and discoverable. All right. So I've given you a lot of information, and we're going to bring it home with some strategies on how to create meaningful online collection experiences. And this is without a CMS. So we're going to go over some examples. I'm breaking it out into immersive visuals, so Instagram and Pinterest, mixed media, so short blog posts or websites, and this could have like videos or audio with images with documents. We can take a look at short videos, and this includes TikTok, YouTube, Facebook Live, etc. And then interactive events. And we've seen a lot of these this year, and they've actually been quite popular for many of our organizations. And those are billed as like fireside chats, lectures, or webinars. So this example is from Instagram, from the Denison Archives, and the archivist there is Sasha Kim, who's right here. And the Denison Archives Instagram page does a great job. Not only are you seeing tons of different mixed media and subjects, we've got video, document, images, for example. They're also taking the time to tell the story in these posts. So why are we seeing this photo? What event is this referencing? Who is this person? Sasha is the archivist there, and it's a video, so it's her telling us about something. And then I also wanted to point out puzzles. Especially this last year, museums and archives using puzzle features, using their digital item collections, has been super popular. So just an aside, if you've not done that yet, like I encourage you to go explore that. But anyway, go check out the Denison Archives Instagram page to see how they're using it, because I am enjoying how they're executing this. All right, Pinterest. You remember we did talk about Pinterest in lieu of a collections management system, providing some of that functionality. For this particular one, I want to talk about how Florida Memory is using Pinterest to help tell stories and to help gather and invite further acquisition collecting. For example, I love this picture. When you click in these photos, and I believe this has been created based on whatever was like most recently uploaded, you then get to explore the gathered pins. This particular one I think is sunbathing in Florida or something like that. So obviously they're creating some artificial collections here that have meaning to the general audience. So whether it is pandemic related, which we're seeing obviously a lot of, whether it's an event, whether it's like summer in Florida, for example, they're creating these artificial collections to tell a story and help engage with their community, encouraging conversation, encouraging more information, and encouraging their acquisitions. And I just want to point out that's, I think that was related to suffragette or suffragism. So yes, Florida Memory Project. Mixed media on blogs. This one is from SAA. It's the Archives Aware blog, so it's not from an archives or museum organization, but I do want to point out that this blog post is a post that is interviewing the archivist at NAACP, the Legal and Educational Defense Fund, and it's with Ashton Wingate. And so throughout the Q&A in interviewing Mr. Wingate, we also inserted in so much great stuff from their collections, photographs, captions explaining the meaning of the person and what's happening in the photo. And similar, they're using Vimeo for their historical film footage. So having a blog post, and even in a Q&A style, which is a easy to breeze through kind of style, inserting photos, historical film footage, etc., to help showcase parts of that collection and introduce that collection in a very easily consumable way. And of course, encourages people to go check out more of the collection. Another example I want to show you is the Canadian Museum of History. They have taken, so they're using stuff from their CMS, but they're putting it into their website where they're like, oh, you go curate your own exhibition, or do you want to learn how to do the traditional basket weaving? By the way, go check out our actual collection of baskets over here. So its purpose for the basket weaving specifically is to provide them with an engaging cultural experience based on things they have in their collection. And then the further next step action is to go check out more of those things in their collection. So this I thought was a great execution of providing a meaningful cultural experience based on their collections. Collection features. So many collection organizations are doing this, museums and archives. This particular example I want to showcase because it's with one of my clients, Astoria Public Library, and they got an Oregon Cultural Trust grant last year. And then COVID happened. And for anybody who's gotten an Oregon Cultural Trust grant, you know that there's usually a community outreach component. That's one of the main drivers of that fund. And so part of what our end product was supposed to be this lecture and tour of collections, which of course can't happen right now. So in lieu of that, I worked with the city historian, John Goodenberger, who's pictured there, and we created little, I think, 5 to 8 minute collection features, picking different parts of the collection to feature, showcasing the historical items that are in that collection while the city historians giving context and meaning, and then creating those and putting them into a playlist so that even though we couldn't give these tours of the collection, they were shared on Astoria's Facebook page, they've been shared with the city council. So they've actually received some nice attention from the community, which was exactly who it was made for. There we go. Okay, admittedly, I am not on TikTok, so I can't speak fully to it. However, I know that there are a lot of museums and archives that are exploring with this medium. It's a great consumer medium. It's quick and easy. Perry Pyle has her own TikTok channel. She is an archivist. And this particular TikTok, she is explaining how archivists are trying to prevent a digital dark age And it's fascinating, and it's a great insight if you are also not familiar with TikTok. It's a great insight into the users of this community. It's popular for a reason, and so paying attention to the way the information is being delivered, I think will help inform you in terms of how the audience that's into TikTok, how they want to be engaged with. So it's a great learning opportunity. Perry Pyle's video on this one is a good first place to start. Okay, back to Astoria for just a second. You know, we did those collection feature videos, and then that led up to an Ask Me Anything event, which of course was a virtual event. And so much like fireside chats that we're seeing happen, lectures, webinars, etc., we're seeing museums pivot from providing very formal, like unidirection information, and instead turning it into an informal and bi-directional mechanism for engaging with your community by framing things like a fireside chat, like a ask me anything. It's really prioritizing the equality among whoever's doing the formal presenting with the audience, and including the audience in that engagement, which is making it a more meaningful engagement experience. And so doing those types of events has been really popular this year due to the pandemic, but I suspect we will see this continue further on post-pandemic, especially since we are finding that we're reaching much broader than our own local audiences. We're starting to see getting traction and engagement from people who would have normally never had the opportunity to come to an in-person lecture in Astoria, Oregon. So it's super interesting to me in terms of user engagement, growing your usership. And then the third thing of when we create these things, before these events used to be one and done, no recordings. But when we are doing these recordings and publishing them to places like YouTube, we are getting further return on investment from that one, like action, putting that action of creating this Ask Me Anything. And now it can be viewed anytime anybody wants to. So I'm very interested in seeing the sustainability of that in addition to getting the continued return on investment. I'm interested in seeing that graph. Okay, so we covered a lot of really great examples of people doing great stuff with or without their CMS and creating some points of engagement. I do want to point out I have a couple webinars where I've worked with other archivists and museum professionals who covered some similar people doing creative things. So one of those webinars is deriving value from collections in the time of Corona. And Chris Cummings and Margot Note do a great job talking about getting creative with content you already have and repurposing it. I talk about how to capture and communicate the value of those efforts, which many of us will probably need to do to justify the different work we're doing. Another webinar to check out is the Archives Are Always Essential, and this is with Ryan Anthony Donaldson. And Ryan, for a big chunk of his session, goes through a lot of local examples, both from the archives and museum community and in adjacent communities like local tourism. So get more ideas from that one. And then the last one that has some great ideas is Breaking with Tradition, Creating Connections in the Archives with New Types of Access. And this is with Bridget Catherine Pride. And Bridget is a wonderful creative colleague. She's done some amazing work at the Schomburg in New York City. And so she lays out some great stuff that she does with her collections and her community. So that was a lot. Here's what we learned. We learned what makes a discoverable collection. We've learned how to deliver collections online without a CMS. And we've learned how to create meaningful online collection experiences. I do want to point out, if you are thinking about your collections management system, whether how to use it better, or maybe you need a new one or one at all if you don't have one, I do have a free ebook. Lucidia Press is kind enough to provide a free ebook to anybody that I send the link to, essentially. So You'll get this link tomorrow in the email, but you can get a free ebook download about collections management stuff if that interests you. Also, if you are interested in my services at all, you can go check out and see what I offer for digital collections management. I do a lot of other writing, content creation, webinars, etc., both with Lucidia and also just on my own YouTube channel. So if you're interested, check it out. And then if you're not already signed up for my newsletter, I encourage you to do so. For example, this webinar was open and offered to all Northwest Archivist members, but once we had those all registered, I was then able to open it up to those in my community. So you're always going to get sort of first bite at the cherry with any sort of content that I am coming out with. All right, contact and connect, phone, email, website, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you would like. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn and Twitter, please do so. I would love to see you there. If you have any questions beyond today, or if you have questions not quite related to the topic today, please feel free to email me. It's consulting@rachelchristine.com. And it's Rachel with an extra AEL at the end and Christine with no H. Thanks, Mom. And just a quick note, this is the Tuesday webinar, and there is a part 2. You don't have to go to it. Some of you are already signed up for it, but if you're not, there's still some space left on Thursday, again at 1 p.m. Pacific, and this is going to dive more into collections management system functions, how to hack what you have or what you don't have, and we're going to get into costs where I have been given permission by several vendors to share like actual real costs with you and talk about cost mitigation, negotiation, etc. So again, if you're in that collections management system space, then this webinar will probably be of interest to you. So I encourage you to register for that. And if you haven't already, you'll get the link tomorrow. All right, that wraps up the formal portion of the content. And I do have Kyle Woody here assisting me if there was Q&A, because apparently in my full screen mode, I can't see the Q&A. So Kyle, I invite you, if there are questions in the box, if you could go ahead and start reading them.
We don't have any questions quite yet. There's just a thank you message from Jen saying thank you for the webinars. As a first year MLIS student, I find them extremely helpful for real world insight.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And if you have ideas or recommendations for future webinars, I think I have one more planned after this week. So I'm looking for new ideas, Jen and everyone else. If you need a particular topic you would like me to cover, let me know and I'll prioritize that. And I know for some people, especially since that was a lot of information, it can take, I think it's at least 90 seconds to 3 minutes to like generate a question. So we'll definitely sit here for a few minutes, me awkwardly on camera, drinking tea, but happy to wait while you guys think about questions and type them out.
Okay, so we got first question from Lewis. Thank you for the POWRR tool grid suggestion. Is this something you find that is still a current tool or to use, or is it outdated?
Good question. So, as you can probably see if you checked out the website for POWRR, it was IMLS funded, and I believe the funding round ran out 2 or 3 years ago. I know that they were trying to keep it up to date, and I think they even have a mechanism where it's sort of like a crowdsourced, like we could help submit new information. Um, so I'm not sure if it's up to date necessarily reflecting every single product out there, but the tool, that like the checklist itself is, in my opinion, still very current in terms of what to look out for in each system and sort of in priority order. So that part at least is something that I still reference now, especially when I'm putting together RFPs, requests for proposals, or grants, especially if it's an IMLS grant. For many of you, if you've done those grants before, you know you have to have a digital preservation plan or a digital like item management plan or whatever they call it. And so if you reference their tool, they will be very pleased.
Okay, the next one. Thank you. I'm wondering if you have experience with institutions sharing collections on the Internet Archive and using this platform as a kind of CMS. What are your thoughts about this use?
Yes, I have been interested in watching Internet Archive develop. I definitely appreciate them as an organization doing all the good work that they do, especially since they have to fund most of it. I am familiar and have a couple clients that are contributing to Internet Archive. Um, I'm not at liberty to give a lot of detail. I know there's been some cumbersomeness to it in terms of how to contribute and some limits on functionality. But I think that's part of the, if you're not paying a whole lot or if you're not paying at all, there, there's only so much functionality you can get. However, I know the Internet Archive, at least from my observations, has been continuing to evolve and it's still like it's actively evolving right now. So while I have seen some people have some frustrations, I think we're going to continue to see some good use out of it. And I think there's some great potential. So it really comes down to if Internet Archive is able to continue or increase their funding and whether us as a professional community want to buy in and support that, as which we're sort of getting off topic here, but as a side note, like there's Digital Public Library of America and several other aggregators out there. And I think we're going to start reaching a point where, as a professional community, if we're really going to try and truly share our collections in a collaborative portal, there can't be multiple siloed portals. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if Internet Archive can do a better job and maybe actually surpass some of the other portals that we've seen. So obviously, I could chat a lot more about that, but I hope that answers at least your initial question.
The next one here from Lydia. Do you have any advice for transitioning from local data storage to cloud based digital storage and making that data available to the public?
Yes. So if I'm interpreting your question correctly, you've got the data locally, maybe in a spreadsheet, maybe in or an Access database, and you're talking about getting into a system, maybe cloud-based with your digital item files as well as the data. For most of my clients who are starting out who don't have a system yet, but hopefully eventually that's the goal, I usually do encourage them to start out in spreadsheet format because for many of the systems that you would later interact with, many of them can import that data. And some of them are even smart and nice enough to actually automatically assign the digital items to the data, depending on how it's set up. Worst case scenario is that whatever product you go with can't do the importing of the spreadsheet, but at least you have all of that information there to do some copy pasting, which is some labor. But if you're able to, there are codes out there that can help you do that, some of which are open source, or if you have access to interns or volunteers, what I recommend is getting it into a spreadsheet and then getting it into a system, whether that's importing or copy paste workflow, etc. So I hope that answered your question. And if I interpreted that wrong, either let me know in the Q&A or send me an email.
The next one here from James. I haven't paid attention for a few years, but I recall some colleagues were using embedded metadata and their digital images, and were also using Flickr, but Flickr used to strip out such metadata. So it wasn't there if you downloaded and looked. Do you know if this is still true, or do you have any caveats around this aspect of Flickr use?
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple things going on with Flickr right now. The last article that I read, and I'm not super up to date, but fairly up to date, is that it does still strip metadata when like users are doing the download. Um, Something that's happening in Flickr right now that may or may not change that is they're moving more and forcing more a paid model. They used to have, I think back way back when they first started, they used to be very openly giving of how much storage you could use up. They've severely, well, severely is maybe not the right word. They have definitely changed the restrictions on that and forcing the paid model. And so my question to them is, if they are enforcing a paid model and you are paying, do you then get that functionality where you can actually check on, like, yes, please keep the metadata when somebody downloads? It should be an easy function. It's a question of whether or not they're motivated to do it. And I'm wondering if this paid model switch is motivation enough for them to do it. So that's my update on Flickr.
The next one here from Rebecca, what do you anticipate the shelf life of some of these tools is going to be? Technology continues to shift quickly along with preferences of the public accessing these sites. It's obviously takes time and resources to set up these alternative sites. I'm just wondering about what level of investment we should commit to these options, knowing full well that viewership will shift as new tools become available, especially with limited time and resources available to most of us in the profession.
Yes, great question. Where to start? So I think while I did provide a lot of examples, I recommend that you pick just one or two. Like, don't try, like, if you want to experiment with all of them, great. I encourage experimentation before you make a decision. However, when you decide to commit your time and energy to developing a collection and a community on one of those platforms, obviously you're only going to have enough time and attention for one or two. And that's where I've seen the most successful organizations is that they're really good at YouTube and Instagram, for example. Um, so choose. Don't do all of them. And I would tie this to, depending on what your job role is, depending on how the community you serve, how you bring your income in, make decisions based on what will serve the greatest amount of your usership for the longest amount of time. And if you can increase or support income streams on top of that, that would be great. But that will help build some longevity into whatever platform it is that you do choose. I do hear your concern on choosing a platform, investing time into it, sometimes money, and then because we are in this digital, rapidly evolving stage in our development, that platforms are changing very quickly. And so that is still a valid concern. I would like to bring up Flickr, Pinterest, YouTube, even. All of these started being pushed in the early 2000s, and they have evolved tremendously, YouTube the most. And so when you're looking at a product like YouTube, we didn't really know if it would be around for a while. And now it's one of like the de facto things that many people outside of our industry use. Flickr, on the other hand, it's still around, but it's changing. See my previous comment about them. So there is some risk to it. So I think just try and get all of the information you can to make the best decision that you can. Do protect your time. Try and pick something that will give you like the most bang for your buck. Pick something that's going to be fun for you, because if it's fun for you, you'll naturally want to engage with it, and it may even be easier to you engage with it. Like, if TikTok is not your thing, you're not interested in learning it, then I'm not going to push you to learn TikTok or use it. So that was a long rambling answer, but I hope gave you some parameters for being thoughtful in making those decisions. I think the only last thing I want to leave you with is the acknowledgement that our usership is changing. As of last year, the workforce is now a majority millennial versus boomer, which is what used to be the majority. And so things like TikTok is obviously a popular platform for people younger than me who will eventually become majority users in our field in the next 10, 20 years. So that's a lot of information and not a straight answer, but I hope that that helped give you some guidelines to help make those decisions.
I think that was our last question for today.
That was a good question. Okay, we'll give it just a couple more minutes as you ruminate on those. I do encourage you to send me an email if you think of one later, or if you would rather chat offline about it. I know we have another webinar again on Thursday, more specific on collections management systems. So I think some of you are perhaps waiting for that one too.
I have another question here. Can you speak to copyright concerns for presenting collections on Pinterest, Instagram, Tumblr, and social media where image sharing and copying is common?
Mm. So this is copyright concern for you own the image, like your organization owns the image and you're worried about somebody using it and doing something else with it is how I'm interpreting that. Because hopefully you do own and have copyright before you're putting stuff online. That is something to be careful of. So yes, um, in my observations as a consultant and with the majority of clients I've worked with, the focus has certainly shifted from being protective of content to being very open with content. Part of that is I think people realize that it's just not as important to them for various reasons that they don't need to control that ownership per se. They're not relying on like rights and reproduction fees, for example. So another thing is that so many of the grants and the funding available now is to put collections online and have them be used. And so many of those sort of have forced further movement towards just being free and open with collections content. That said, there are still many organizations that do have collections content that you want to protect copyright for. So in those cases, there's a couple options. None of them are super great. There's the obvious one where there's watermarking you could do on the image. There are ways that you can do it. For example, I'm a big fan of the watermarking that creates a texture mark versus like obscuring the image mark. That way people can still see and enjoy the content without it being like obviously censored. But with that raised, I think it's the embossing watermark. It prevents them from reproducing it. So sort of the best of both worlds going that route. Obviously having some text in with whether it's Instagram, Pinterest, whatever, text of like, this is owned by the such and such archives or museum, please contact such and such for permissions, etc. That's another thing to do. And then depending on what you're protecting and why, maybe have a question about, okay, if it's high stakes, maybe we just don't put it online, or at least not in like a downloadable format. Those might be candidates for something like doing a feature video. Yes, people could still probably take a screenshot of it being shown on the video, but at least it wouldn't be like a high res enough where somebody could reproduce and make money off of it. So yeah, a couple options there.
That appears to be our last question for now.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody so much. If you have questions that pop up later on, feel free to email me. For those that I'll see again on Thursday, I'll see you soon. And for everybody who joined today, Northwest Archivists, Alicia, everybody who donated to the Archivist in Residence, just thank you so much. It's been really fun creating these webinars for you. And if you have ideas for further ones, I would love to hear them. So please do get in touch. And this recording will be put up tonight, and you'll get all of the links tomorrow, so you can have fun with that. So thank you everybody so much, and see you soon.